Here we are once again indulging in some more Lauri Markkanen drama, or if you're a Utah Jazz fan, Utah Jazz drama. Thanks for tuning in this video. It's your boy Wraith Hoops. Today we're going to be exploring a very interesting trade. If you're a Spurs fan, make sure you tap in and listen up. And in exchange, I'll make sure to do my best to break this down in the most concise way possible, talk about the merit that both sides can gain from this, and if it's even feasible to occur to begin with. That being said, let's go ahead and get into this one. As it is understood, the San Antonio Spurs were obviously at the bottom of the Western Conference. That said, they ended up bagging 2 picks, one via trade, because they are going to be at 4th and 8th this year in the first round. They plan on mixing things up if they can this offseason, but only if they can get a point guard. Now, the question becomes, what if they can't get a point guard? What if they don't find the all-star caliber guard that they're hoping to pair alongside Victor Wembanyama? Yes, they have a couple other very interesting pieces on their roster. Jeremy Sohan, you have Keldon Johnson, but there's not enough to necessarily push you over the edge anywhere close to, because they were at the bottom of the West, which is the most competitive conference out of the two in the NBA. The question then becomes, if you can't get that guard, do you look elsewhere and see if you can get another sneaky piece? Because do they really need the 4th and 8th overall pick in this year's draft, considering there's so few surefire picks to begin with? Or considering the fact that they're still going to be middling and mediocrity if they don't get that point guard regardless? I don't think so. I think that they'd be willing to make a deal. And so I was researching and came across a very interesting suggestion by Inside the Spurs, where they looked at one trade proposal provided by Give Me Sport. And they said that the Spurs perhaps might be willing to trade away Keldon Johnson, Zach Collins, the 8th overall pick, a 2025 first round protected pick from the Chicago Bulls, and the first rounder from the Atlanta Hawks in 2026, and another first round pick in 2027 in exchange for Lauri Markkanen. Obviously, we know that Johnson and Collins have their opportunities to be offensively proficient, and that's what they're most known for with the San Antonio Spurs. But that would be immediately replaced by Lauri Markkanen's shooting prowess. Remember, at 27 years old, he ended up putting together 24.5 points, 8.4 rebounds, 1.9 assists, and shot 39.5% from 3 across his 2 seasons with the Jazz. The first year being an all-star, and this year, despite playing 55 games, being borderline an all-star caliber player in his own right. Because if you saw how Karl-Anthony Towns played for the majority of this most recent series that they lost against the Dallas Mavericks, if you're a Timberwolves fan, I think you would much have rather had Lauri Markkanen. There's no way on this beautiful green globe that you're going to see Lauri Markkanen shoot as abysmal as Karl-Anthony Towns did. Why? Because Lauri Markkanen is a marksman by trade. All but roughly 6 or 7 of his threes on the season were assisted by a guard or forward on his team. That tells you that Lauri Markkanen isn't much of a big creator in his own right, but he does have a little bit of that knack. As the season progressed, he did seem to try things a little bit better, and he just tried to get more shot attempts up on his own, which is why his field goal percentage overall wasn't too terrific as the latter stages of the season progressed onwards. But that also means that once you do eventually get that guard that you are so drastically desiring to have, he will fit in seamlessly. And since Victor Wembanyama is going to be your centerpiece for your team, let's not forget how great he was offensively, despite them not really keying in on him as the core point of that offense with his minutes restriction situation to begin with this past season. And you have another big with tantalizing size and mobility that will allow them to play together really seamlessly. Imagine Victor Wembanyama sizing somebody up and kicking on a drive to Lauri Markkanen, who sprays down a 3. Then the next time down, Lauri Markkanen receives a catch and then drops it off to Victor Wembanyama or lobs it to him at the rim. 7-footer to 7-footer action is absolutely diabolical, and this duo would be even nastier than Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. Or honestly, in some situations, even better than a LeBron and Anthony Davis, considering that LeBron only has a couple seasons left in the league, as we all know. That said, losing 4 first-round picks is going to be a pretty hefty price if you are a Spurs fan and if you are the front office, and so it does merit a little bit of pause. But it still puts you in a situation where you're like, Lauri Markkanen can rebound at an elite rate. He can score an elite rate, and he's a pretty solid defender. He's not as great as he potentially could be, but don't forget, this is the Spurs we're talking about, and they're known for their ability to get guys onto that defensive page. For guys like DeJounte Murray, who experienced their first all-defensive teams with the San Antonio Spurs, it only makes sense that they have the opportunity to take that next step forward and be progressive. And if I trust anybody to get Lauri Markkanen on that page, I trust Greg Popovich and that coaching staff in San Antonio. Now, alongside Victor Wembanyama and Devin Vassell, you would see the Spurs offense have a very lengthy, oversized lineup that would be a three-headed monster, and they would still need that guard piece, but it would still be absolutely tantalizing to imagine in your mind. They would ultimately end up losing out on just a little bit of rookie talent, but at the same time, you already have the foundational building block in Victor Wembanyama. He just needs to gain a little bit of weight. He's shown that he can dominate the league right out the gate. The man was blocking shots left and right, and if you played him upwards of the minutes that Rudy Gobert played, I think there will be no question, and people could not argue the possibility of Rudy Gobert being deserving of that actual Defensive Player of the Year award, even though I personally felt like it should have gone to the rookie Wemby to begin with. People just felt like because the Spurs were not enough of a winning organization, it was Rudy's situation. And Rudy has better defenders around him, for one. And for two, Rudy played a significant portion of more minutes. When Wemby was on the court, they were positive in most of the lineups that he was situated with. But in the minutes that he wasn't on the court, they were getting outscored by double digits for their box score plus minus, which tells you it wasn't Wemby's fault. And when Wemby was on the floor, even with subpar players on the court alongside him, he was still able to get the job done. And if you think they weren't subpar from a player and talent standpoint alongside him, name the starters for the Spurs. Crickets. And that's why. Despite that, though, Wemby was able to, on a consistent basis, with consistent health, by the way, play up to standard and mask a lot of the issues that the Spurs had, whether it be defensively or even offensively. He had the highest step back three-point percentage of all qualifying players in the metric, and while he did shoot a little bit south of 35% from three, he does have that three ball in his bag, and playing alongside Lauri Markkanen would allow him to take an even bigger step forward from his shooting. Remember, Wemby's more of a dribbler than Lauri is, but at the same time, Wemby's game from a shooting standpoint isn't necessarily as polished. Put Wemby alongside arguably the greatest big man shooter right now in the game, unless you're a Karl-Anthony Towns fan, and you have a boost on top of what he was already pegged to be. And if everybody does view Wemby as still being that generational talent that he already was pegged as being coming out of the draft, I think that playing alongside a big like Lauri Markkanen, who is an overseas player from Finland himself, it would add a little bit of extra swagger and a little bit of extra boost to Wemby's game, and just a little bit more of a veteran presence that would be reliable in the facets of the game that Wemby would also be exposed to on a situational basis. And it would also allow Lauri to be pegged alongside a genuine five who literally gets guys to turn away from the rim when they're getting shots up, because they don't want to have to deal with his length. And it puts you in a situation where if you decide to run a zone defense, having 7-footer alongside 7-footer alongside extra length, it's going to be very problematic for other teams whenever they play the Spurs. And then it just comes down to who that guard is going to be to help them catapult into the playoff picture and be a perennial contending team. If you're the Utah Jazz, you understand that there's been a lot of situations where you felt like you should have had the opportunity to either completely bottom out to begin with the season, or just go ahead and trade around some draft picks and find a star player and give up what is necessary in order to obtain them. By default, this trade would allow them to have more of those assets and actually catapult into the top 10. Remember, their pick that was originally projected to be 8th ended up sliding back to 10th. So ending up grabbing that 8th pick and not stealing away the 4th pick from the Spurs would actually be kind of nice, because the Spurs wouldn't be too pressed over it if they decided to pull the trigger on this one. But at the same time, with the picks in subsequent drafts, it would allow them to move those around and use an even bigger pool to either end up bottoming out this year and ending up with a top 5 pick that they could end up amassing a lot of picks for to trade up and get either Cooper Flagg or one of the top more surefire prospects in this draft, or they could end up going out and go big game hunting as Danny Ainge hoped to and find themselves in a situation where they like the opportunities that they're going to be presented. Either way, they're not going to take a step forward from this trade in particular, but I found it to be interesting because of the type of pieces that they could end up potentially getting with, obviously, the young talent, Keldon Johnson. Some people aren't the highest on him, and then you also have Zach Collins. Some people aren't the highest on him either, but nevertheless, it is more of a salary filler kind of situation, and they're not necessarily the most useless pieces. They do have a fair bit of worth. They just, quite frankly, aren't Lauri Markkanen. And in a world where you could see the Jazz shuffling around a lot of pieces this offseason, they might just end up going into the carousel in exchange for something even bigger that would allow them to move around even further. But worst case scenario, you'll find a situation where the Jazz end up electing to bottom out this year because they can't go big game hunting. They do entertain a trade possibly like this, and if it does happen to be the Spurs, I think that as a Jazz fan who also likes Lauri Markkanen, it'll be worth watching a little bit of Spurs basketball if the trade were to happen. But you guys let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know if you are a Spurs fan, do you think that this would be a very tantalizing trade as much as I described it to be? And if you're a Utah Jazz fan, do you think that bottoming out this year, since we're likely not to end up getting a massive haul in any situation because Danny Ainge doesn't like to overpay for anything, would be worth doing? Or do you think they should end up keeping Lauri and trying to find another way to get another star to that team? With that being said, if you're a fan of either team or just NBA action in general, go on to smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on post notifications and become a member or drop a super thanks to help support the channel. With that being said, it's your boy Wraith Hoops. As always, good morning, good evening, and good night, no matter where you're in the globe watching. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.